Hey everyone, Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. Now, why wouldn't you want to invest in the very best areas? Why would you want to invest in the second best or the third best? Well, of course you don't. So this episode is going to be great for you because we give you the very best places to invest in England, Scotland, and Wales.
Welcome to the Property Podcast, my personal favourite time of the week, and hope you enjoy it as well, because it's when we get to take some time out from our day jobs of advising a multi-million pound property fund. You can find out more about at portfolio.co.uk and arranging deals for our clients as well, and bring you some of the knowledge that we've gained along the way, and doing that for free. Today, make sure you stick around to the end because in Hub Extra, we're recommending a YouTube channel that I think you will love. But before that, our top threes, including a discussion of what we believe is the most undervalued city in the UK. All that coming up. So we'll start with our news story for this week, and what a story it is. How could we talk about anything else, Rob, than the fact that we've got a new Prime Minister? Personally, I feel like my life has changed on a pretty deep level. I'm still coming to terms with it and what it's going to mean for me personally. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm the same. No, actually, I don't care. And the reason I don't care, I think, is important because I don't want to tell people how to think and feel, but I'll let people know how I think and feel about this as a subject now. And then maybe you can slightly adapt your view on the world and how you interact with it, because it is important. Because I don't think it makes a big difference to your life, whoever the Prime Minister is. If you're waiting for an individual to make your life better, or alternatively, you think an individual is going to make your life worse, then I think you're going to really struggle because it isn't down to them. It's down to you. You're the one that is going to make your life better or worse. You can change things. You're the one in control. You have ultimate ownership. And I used to really care and be really passionate about politics. Used to even be a member of a party. Used to really get me wound up when people would go against my views and not see the world in my way. And I was obviously a lot younger then and a lot more naive. And today I've gone full circle. And it was probably originally driven by being fed up of it all, but then taking a better view and a better lens to the situation and saying, actually, does it matter? And maybe you think it does, and that's fine. You can feel passionate about these things. But I tell you what, you get a lot less wound up if you don't become passionate. And if you focus on you and your situation and what you want from the world and how you can influence the world for the better, then I think that's a much better framework to work within. Bit heavy to begin the pod with, Rob, but we were talking about this off mic and thought, you know what, it might be useful to share this view of the world and see if it helps others.
Yeah, I think so. The wonderful thing about politics is people do get so wound up about it that we offend people when we talk about politics, but whenever we say anything, people seem to jump to the fact that we support the party that they don't and get offended, even though we haven't said anything about a particular party. And then if we say we don't care about it, people who do care about it get very upset and say how we should care about it. But to me, that kind of proves your point, which is that it just gets you wound up. And if you spend an equivalent amount of time and mental energy and emotion working on something that you can directly control, whether that's helping yourself or your family or people around you, then you're probably going to be happier and more useful for it. A bit of breaking news for you now. And since we recorded the rest of this episode, the Scottish Government has come out and introduced a rent freeze and a ban on evictions in response to the so-called cost of living crisis. This is a big deal, and I've got a lot of thoughts on it. And while this came too late to make it into this episode, we will, of course, speak about it in future episodes. But I'm also writing about it for my weekly newsletter, which is coming out tomorrow. So if you're not already subscribed to that one and you want to find out more about this story and its implications, go to propertyhub.net/news, sign up there, and you can read all about it. Okay, this is the part of the show where most podcasts would do a 45-second ad read for HubSpot or MailChimp or something like that. But we're not going to do that, because we never do that. We don't have any ads on this show. We're just going to ask you to do one thing if you're enjoying the show, and that, Rob, is leave us a review.
Yeah, we used to ask for reviews way back when, and we have a lot of reviews. In fact, over 1,000. So many, and it's amazing. Thank you for that. But as we've not mentioned reviews for a long time, we haven't really had many reviews for a long time. And we do really appreciate them and love reading them. So if you do enjoy the show and you want a little way of saying thank you, well then a great gift to us is leaving a review. Or if you want to go to that next level, leave a review and let someone else know about this podcast. Share it, because the more people that get to listen to the podcast, the more people we can help. So it's a win-win, really, because it's a gift to us, but hopefully the person who receives it sees it as a gift as well. So you're making lots of people happy. So If you want to make lots of people happy in life, please leave a review and share the podcast. And as I've said, we do read them, so we look forward to seeing what you think of the show, your lovely words, and thank you in advance.
And you know what? Something just occurred to me. Episode 500 is coming up just around the corner. Maybe we'll read some out for episode 500. I don't know what we're going to do for episode 500, but we're probably going to do something really good. That's only a few weeks away now, which is terrifying. Okay, let's get on to our main topic this week, the top 3 places to invest in England, Scotland and Wales. Yes, people who think we don't talk about Scotland or Wales enough, today is your lucky day. We're going to list 3 for each country. But before we do that, Rob, I think we need to define what we mean by a top place, because there are a million different ways to invest in property. There are so many different goals you could have. So I suppose there is no such thing as a top place for everyone. So maybe we should explain how we're thinking about this.
Yeah, so each and every year we do a Hotspots podcast and video on YouTube, and we look at the places that we think are the best places to invest right now. And we know you love those episodes because we look at the downloads. But what we wanted to do is take a different approach with this pod and look at the best places ongoing. So if we told you to invest there today, we'd feel comfortable, but we'd also be comfortable telling you it in 5 years' time. And if we told you 5 years ago, we'd be comfortable as well. Basically, this is a place to invest for the long term. It's not the latest and greatest and flashiest place right now. It's just a place that will serve you well now and over the coming years. And if you invest today, in 20 years, we'd like to think you'd be quite happy. Now, don't come and see us in 20 years if you're not, but neither do we expect you in 20 years to come and shake our hands. So when you look at a location for the long term, you do view places with a slightly different lens. It's not just about yield. It's not just about fundamentals. It's not just about where's the latest growth hotspot. It kind of combines everything, and it's a place that should stand the test of time. Will it be the best place to invest this year? Well, maybe some of them might get on that list, but probably not. Will it be the best place to invest over the next 5 years? Maybe. But over the next 10 or 20 years, when you take that longer term view, a lot of these places that we list should be doing quite well.
Okay, so with that in mind, let's get started. Let's start with Scotland, shall we?
Rob, a lot of Scottish listeners have just fallen off their chair. They don't think they get enough Scotland love, and they're going first. I think we should acknowledge that. Scotland is going first today, so our lovely Scottish listeners, this is for you.
This is for you. And the first place that we have chosen as a top place to invest in Scotland is sterling. And the reason for choosing sterling is, Rob, you said that it's not just about the fundamentals, but sterling is kind of fundamentals heaven in that it's in an amazing location and it's got a super diversified economy. So it's almost equidistant between Edinburgh and Glasgow. It's commutable to both. You can also get the train to places like Dundee, Perth and Aberdeen. You can get by road to the Highlands really easily. So when we're talking about long-term demand, which is basically what we're talking about in this list, you can see why that's going to be there. It's also strong for tourism because of Stirling Castle, but it's not just the tourism. There's a huge mix of different employers in different sectors, and there's a university as well. So again, if you're picking somewhere to put your money for a decade or more, that's going to be appealing. And you said, Rob, that we don't give Scotland much love, and we probably should give it more, because when you go and look at the prices in sterling, it just feels like a steal. So house prices there are above average for Scotland, as you would expect, because it's got so much going for it. But the average price is round about £215,000, which is just so inexpensive compared to many cities in England that we talk about a lot. And the yields are strong as well. So this isn't to say everyone should go and pile in there right now. We're not saying that about anywhere that we're talking about today. But if I did suddenly decide that I had to go and invest in Scotland, and I was doing so with the type of strategy that I use anyway, which is investing for the long term and just renting out and holding, then it would be top of my list.
Next on the list is an interesting one, because we said we're looking at places that you'd be happy to invest in over the next 10, 20 years, taking that long-term view. But I'm not too sure if this place would have made our list 20 years ago, because it was a very different place. And that place is Glasgow. Glasgow has completely transformed over the last 20 years. It's gone from a city that was struggling, a bit like my home city, Liverpool, and it's transformed itself for the better. Again, a bit like Liverpool. So it can really relate to Glasgow. Now, Glasgow has the biggest population in Scotland. A lot of people may assume it's Edinburgh because it's the capital, but no, it's Glasgow. So you've got that strong base there, that it's the most populated area within Scotland. And then you look at how it's changed and transformed over the last couple of decades, and it's become a real success story. And of course, you have the fundamentals because of that population centre, but because of all the investment and all the investment to come, Glasgow is an incredibly attractive place to invest for the long term. Now, again, prices are very low compared to some areas in England, and yields are very strong compared to some places in England. You regularly see Glasgow or regions of Glasgow listed as the top yielding place in the UK, the top yielding city. And if it's not top, it's normally in the top 5. So it's always there or thereabouts. I think over time that will change, because as Glasgow improves more, I think the yields will compress and you won't get as much as you do now. And while Glasgow has dramatically improved, I think it's worth saying, and just like any area, there are some great places in Glasgow now, but there are also some places that are not as nice. And you shouldn't be going into the cheapest place to get the best yield just because we've mentioned it. Of course, with any of the places we list today, do your research. But for me, I think the opportunity within Glasgow is to pick the very best areas, because they'll be great today, but they should still be great in 20 years' time. Pick a place that people desire to live in, whatever the market is doing. And if you can invest in the very best places in Glasgow, the places that everybody in that city wants to live, then you should do very well over the long term. So it's not trying to be too clever when you look at Glasgow. Go for the safe and obvious. The yields will still be great compared to many other cities that we'll list today. But then you've played it safe by going for the better places, and I think that'll serve you over the long term.
Okay, let's move on to our third and final pick for Scotland, and that is Edinburgh. And I know 2 of the 3 are the 2 biggest cities in Scotland. We're not just naming the only places we can think of in Scotland. There are lots of other great places to invest. And if you want to highlight any of those and you don't mind a bit of extra competition, then do let us know. We're always keen to hear where you invest. We're on all the socials at Property Hub UK. But remember, the brief here is for somewhere that you can just buy, forget about it for 10 years, and then come back and be pretty confident that it's done well. And that's why Edinburgh has to be one of those selections. Rob said that Glasgow probably wouldn't have made the list 10, 20 years ago, and now it would. Edinburgh would have done back then, and therefore it almost certainly will do in the future. It's just one of those enduring cities that you can have a lot of confidence in. And as a result, I'd say the investment approach here would be a little bit different. So you could take the approach of going for the very best assets in the very best locations. Nothing wrong with that at all, and you could do very well. But there is more scope in Edinburgh to go a little bit further out and look for the developing areas, because the yields in Edinburgh aren't going to be as high as they are in Glasgow. So by going a little bit further out, by going to a good secondary area that's still well connected in terms of transport and everything else, you can get a little bit of a better yield while still being confident in having strong demand, no issues, etc., etc. As a side point, when we're talking about Edinburgh, holiday lets are always going to come to mind because of the festival and because of the strong tourism demand, which again is always going to be there. That could be a play that's worth looking at, but holiday lets are being cracked down on in Scotland in general and in Edinburgh in particular. We've actually got a YouTube video that came out this week on that subject. So do head over to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/propertyhubuk, to learn more about that.
Okay, Rob, we can put our nosebleeds aside now. We'll come back to England. We went quite far north there. We went outside of our comfort zone. But I hope our Scottish listeners appreciate going first. Or maybe not, because now we directed a load of other people to Scotland and made them interested in areas you're investing in. However, don't worry, we've got England and Wales to come up. And let's tackle England next. We're going to start with another capital. And again, this might be obvious, going for London. Yes, if you didn't know that was the capital, then please stop the podcast and go back to school. But actually, maybe to long-term listeners of the podcast, you're surprised that we're listing London, because for a long time, we've said it's not a place we'd be investing in right now. And more recently, we've kept a bit of an eye on London because it's starting to become interesting. But actually, for a long time, it's not been on our radar. So to list London may surprise a few. But it doesn't surprise us because, to state the obvious, London is a world city. It's an international, famous city that will always be famous. It's historic. It's known by pretty much everybody across the globe. It's in that same bucket as New York or Sydney or Hong Kong. It's known. People know London across the globe, and therefore people want to go there, spend their time there, and invest there. And short-term factors don't matter when it comes to London. So COVID and how people choose to live, for me, doesn't matter with London. Going through there on a regular basis It's packed at the moment. If people have moved out the cities, well, I want to know who's moved in, because London is busy and it's bouncing. People also said London was done after we left Europe. Again, not going to be the case. London is a world-famous international city. So that status isn't going to change. So whatever happens to London, London will always bounce back. And over the last few years, have there been better places to invest? Absolutely yes. But over the long term, Rob, we are actually big fans.
Massively. But if it came down to it, the property that I hold in London is probably the last I would sell. If for some reason I got absolutely fed up with property, or I was forced to sell property because it's all gone horribly wrong, the stuff I own in London is the last that I would offload. And that's not because it produces the highest yields. It doesn't. It's not because it's the most glamorous or fancy. It's not. But because of what you've just said. It's always going to be there, and it's always going to bounce back strongly after a setback. We saw that after 2008. London, after the crash, bounced back so fast. It was years ahead of the rest of the country. And we've talked about this in a previous episode. I can't remember the exact data now, but it's something like if you bought at the absolute peak of the market in January 2008, and then you saw it drop, in the rest of the country, it would have taken you about 6 years to get back to even again. In London, it was something like 18 months. It was like a shockingly short period of time. And that's why it's so appealing. Would I invest in London for my strategy right now? No, it's getting close, but I still wouldn't, because I still believe, based on where I currently am and what I'm trying to achieve, I'm not looking for ultimate safety. I am looking for opportunity and upside, and I believe that is greater elsewhere. But in terms of the brief that we set ourselves at the start of this episode, you can't beat it.
So where do we go after London? Well, we go much further north. In fact, our Scottish neighbours will be familiar with this city because they had a few scraps there over the years. Not recently, but unless you've been on a night out. But York is next on our list. And York is there for similar reasons to London, actually, because it's historic. It's famous across the world. Most people will know York. But it's also one of those places that whatever the economy is doing, people will want to live there because it's a beautiful place and the fundamentals are very, very strong. York is a desirable place to live. It's beautiful. If you've not visited, do yourself a favour, head up or down to York and go and check it out. It's a beautiful, beautiful city. And the reason it's made the list is not just because it's historic and it's one of those places that people want to live in any economy, because we could have listed Oxford, we could have listed Cambridge. They're not on the list. The reason why York has trumped them is because actually it's really small, and being able to live in York is constrained by the amount of land they have, particularly if you live within the city walls, because there's very, very little that can be built within there, and planning is very strict, and rightly so. York is an area that Property Hub Invest has been targeting over the last few years. That's our business that we work with people who want help with property investment. This is not an advert. If you're interested in that, go and check out the website, which you can find at propertyhub.net/invest. But the reason we're always keen to do a deal there is for the reasons I've mentioned. It's a place that will always do well. But at the moment, we feel it's an area that's kind of underpriced for what it is, and there's more value there. So it's a place that would make our kind of top lists right now to invest, but it also doubles up as a place that we'd happily invest in for the long term as well, over the decades. So it's a really interesting place because it makes our list for the short term, but it also makes our list for the long term. So if York has been off your radar, maybe get it on your radar, because it's actually quite easy to invest in as a place when you get your head around it. It's not scary. It's got great fundamentals. It's got great prestige. It's got a great track record. Yields are okay. So if you've not considered York as a place to invest, maybe you should add it to your list.
Yeah, very much so. We've been talking a lot about safety in this list so far, because when you're investing for the long term, that's something that you're going to be very concerned with. And with York, along with that safety, you get potentially some short-term upside as well, because it does seem a bit underpriced for what it is. But what if you could have that safety plus even more upside? Well, that's what's potentially on offer in the third place that we've chosen, and that is Derby. Now, Derby, again, is something that we've been targeting both for our fund portfolio. You can find out more about portfolio.co.uk, and for Property Hub Invest. But we're not talking about Derby because we're investing there. We've invested there because we kept talking about it, and we knew it was a great place to invest. And you can go back and listen. We've been talking about it for years. And I said, you've got safety plus upside. Well, the reason for the safety is it's got such a strong local economy. It's got such a range of employers. It's got lots of prestigious high-wage employers. So the right property in the right area in Derby is always going to be in demand. It's always going to rent well. There's also not much that's been built in Derby recently, which helps. But then it's got the upside potential, Rob, which you might want to talk about a bit, because it is, for me, very, very cheap, and local wages are so strong.
I actually think it might be the most underpriced city in England right now. I really do. I think Derby has so much going for it. Great employment, high wages when you compare it to the rest of the UK, but low property prices. And also similar to York, it's quite restrictive when it comes to planning because of the cathedral there and what you can and can't build in the centre. So Derby has a lot going for it. And it's no surprise that we've been targeting it very heavily over the last few years. And again, like York, this is one of those places that would make our short-term list and also now our long-term list. So it may come as a bit of a surprise, when we've listed London, York, people are probably thinking, what's next? Another place that's similar to that. And Derby at first may sound confusing, but the more you look into Derby, the more you'll become a fan. And I know we've got some listeners who've invested in Derby and won't be thanking us for directing people's attention to there. But we feel like we're doing well there. We're investing there in pretty much every way we can. And we just want as many people to win as possible because we do really, really like Derby for the short term and the long term. So another one to add to your list, because as I've said, I think Derby might be one of the most underpriced cities in the UK. And because of that, it absolutely makes our list.
Yeah, I think it's exactly right. And the key word there that you used is underpriced. There are lots of relatively cheap places you could invest in England, but they don't have that safety factor. And that's what makes Derby so appealing. And of course, I've got to mention, because I love it, Nottingham just down the road, if you fancy that instead.
Oh, you had to mention Nottingham, but I did mention Liverpool earlier, so you're allowed.
It had to be done. Okay, Rob, Wales, go.
Wales, I love Wales. I spent a lot of time in Wales over the years and actually have family who live in Wales, and occasionally they listen, so hello to you if you are. So, Wales. Well, let's start with the easy one, Rob, the one that people would expect us to list, and that's Cardiff. And without repeating ourselves too much, it's for the similar reasons we've listed Edinburgh and London. Okay, it may not be as well famous as those two locations, but being a capital city, it has stronger fundamentals than anywhere else in Wales, and it has more investment going into it than anywhere else in Wales, great transport links, and while people may not know it across the world, it's certainly known within the UK, and for all the obvious reasons, Cardiff has to be on the list. But it's when we move to next on the list, Rob, that we might surprise people because we're moving away from the major cities and moving to a couple of recommendations that some people may have not even heard of. Of course, people who live local to these areas may be offended, but don't be, it's your beautiful secret. And that is Anglesey and Abersoch. They are close to each other. They're in northwest Wales, and they are both beautiful, beautiful areas and desirable because of that. They have beautiful beaches, some of the best in the whole of the UK, not just Wales. And because of that, a lot of people go there and holiday there. In fact, Abersoch I've heard referred to as Manchester by the Sea because so many people have holiday homes there from Manchester and go every single weekend. I know it's popular with a few people from our Manchester office who go there on a regular basis. Anglesey and Abersoch are those places that people dream of having a holiday home. And because of that, they make our list. Now, when you look at them, fundamentals-wise, they're not strong. It takes ages to get there. They're kind of way out on their own. But it's because of the beaches they have, that natural beauty, and therefore, and the fact that they're not very big, means that you've got a place that people will always want to live and always want to visit. And that's the theme of this podcast, really, is will these places still be desirable, wanted in 10, 20 years' time? Well, unless they remove the beaches, yes, Anglesey and Abersoch will make that list when it comes to Wales, because they are stunning, desirable, but also small, which means that only so many people can live there, only so many people can invest there. And it's going to be interesting to see how the Welsh Government handles places like Anglesey and Abersoch and others where so many people from outside the area are buying homes and are investing and are creating holiday lets, and what regulation they'll bring in. They've started to do some already, but they may up that because there's a lot of local pressure from people who live in those areas. But unless something changes on that front in a dramatic way, Anglesey and Abersoch seem pretty safe bets.
Yeah, agreed. And I think it's interesting because those selections do seem like such outliers compared to many of the others that we've chosen. But actually, when you dig into the reasoning, the reasoning's pretty much the same. I think that's an important lesson to take away from what Rob's just said. Okay, this is where we risk offending everyone in Wales. And I'm really not happy that I've been landed with this part of the show. But I'm going to try and navigate this as best I can, and maybe you can come in and help me, because this is not meant to be offensive. It's meant to be making a point. Third place is everywhere and nowhere, let's say. And what I mean by that is a top place in the terms that we set it up at the top of the show. There isn't a standout. And maybe if you've got more knowledge of Wales than we do, you can listen to the things that we've talked about as being important in our selections and say, what are you talking about? This place has got it in spades. And that is entirely possible. I'm certainly not setting myself up as being any kind of expert. But that does not make Wales a bad place to invest by any means, because large parts of the country are great for other reasons. So as it happens, Wales would have been a phenomenal place to invest over the last couple of years because price growth in Wales has outstripped anywhere else in the UK. Prices have been rocketing upwards. And I think one of those reasons is that prices were so low, relatively speaking. And so that was an imbalance that needed to be corrected. And I believe that growth is going to keep going for a bit as well. But the other thing that Wales has got going for it, because prices are still so relatively low, is high yields. So if your strategy is to really pile up the rental income, you want to take your capital and transform it into a stream of as much rental income as you can. And that's where you're placing your most weight relative to factors like security and capital growth and things like that. Then Wales has ample opportunities. So Rob, if I haven't dug myself out of the hole quite enough, maybe you can come in and do that now. But I think the point is, putting like country boundaries aside, some areas lend themselves more to certain investment strategies than others, and that's fine.
Well, actually, Rob, I beg to differ, and I've got a long list of places I would list. So third on the list. No, you're joking. Don't worry, I'll take the heat with you. No, unsurprisingly, Rob, I completely agree. I mean, we did put the show notes together, so it would be a real surprise to you if I did disagree. But the criteria for this list means that we don't have a third place. We could list a third and more if we were looking at short-term options for Wales. Places where we say are hotspots right now. That's easier to do, because you look at fundamentals, you look at affordability, you look at the pricing, and you go, okay, well, actually, a lot of these things combined point to these areas being a great investment for the next few years. And you know what? We've had a great track record of picking those areas over the years. But that isn't this podcast. This podcast is trying to give you a different lesson and a different lens on how to view property. And that is if you're taking the long-term view. And yes, you know what? It is always good trying to buy a place that will do well in the short term and the long term. That's what we try and do. But if you really want to play it safe, the point of this podcast is to give you places that will do okay over the short term. Some of them will do very well, like your Derbys and your Yorks and possibly your Glasgows. But then longer term, whatever you pick off this list or similar, you will do very well with. And Rob's already said you can apply the framework that we've used to other areas across the UK. This isn't the list. This isn't like, and there's nowhere else. Of course there is. In this pod, we've name dropped Liverpool, Nottingham, Cambridge, and others. There's lots of areas that could have made this list. We've narrowed it down to the ones that we think are the top areas over the long term. So if you take that framework and apply it to your own investment decisions, then you too, over the long term, should do very well.
Just before we wrap up the show, it's time for Hub Extra, the part of the show where we give you a little bit more, a resource of some form. And today that resource comes in the form of a YouTube channel. Now, we've said that we're ramping up our activity on YouTube. There's a video about holiday lets this week. There's another one recently about how the super rich invest, which is really interesting. And they've got another great one lined up for next week. So do subscribe to our channel, youtube.com/propertyhubuk. But that is not the resource. Because we're doing more on YouTube, I've been watching a lot of YouTube and trying to find some of the best creators on there to see how they make their content as informative and entertaining as possible so we can borrow some ideas. And in the course of doing that, I came across Leon Hendricks. So we'll link to his channel in the show notes. The thing I love about Leon Hendricks is that he's basically doing personal development content. It's about productivity and goals and entrepreneurship, things like that. The kind of topics that get covered endlessly on YouTube and elsewhere. There's so much Me Too content that's exactly the same as everything else, and you feel like you've seen it all before. The amazing thing about what he does is he'll take one of these concepts and make it super, super compelling. Each one's kind of like a 10 to 15 minute mini documentary. The way he puts these together are so, so good. So if you want to watch, which is basically feels like entertainment, but you're also going to learn something as well, then strongly recommend that channel.
You know, when you're winning in life is when you can watch YouTube and get to call it work. That's that's pretty cool that we can do that. And maybe you're winning in life because you can call listening to the podcast work, at least self-development at the very least, because hopefully by the end of this episode now, you've got to a place where you know a little bit more, feel a little bit more confident at making decisions, and possibly a different view on how to approach investing for the long term. Remember, if you're enjoying the pod, then do let us know. Please leave us a review in iTunes. It's super simple to do. And if you're listening to Spotify, you can rate us there as well. But if you really want to help the show out, then please do share it. Please do let other people know about the Property Podcast, because the more people that listen, is the more people we can help. And we'll be back on Tuesday to try and help a little bit more with Ask Rob and Rob. And of course, as you'd expect, back with the main pod, same time next week. So until then, take care, have fun, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.